Hello! This is going to be the beginning of a Q&A for January and sort of the end of December there. I'm going for a little walk and just figured I'd start answering questions now while it's nice and sunny and pretty out. So one of the first questions I got that I want to talk about is tallow. Someone asked the best way to incorporate herbs into tallow for a lotion or a cream. There are people who infuse tallow with herbs, and I think that's fine, but there's really only one way to do that, and that is to use heat. My personal favorite thing to do is to just use tallow as an ingredient in a salve or cream or what have you. And the way that you would do that is by infusing your herbs into the other ingredients, which typically for a whipped tallow butter or a salve or a cream, you're going to be using oils. I typically do mostly oil, a part of a butter, shea butter, tallow, mango butter, any of those things, and then sometimes beeswax. If you hear noises, it's the creek and the road. So we do infuse tallow sometimes. Like, for example, we have an enfleurage that we make called Juniper Ridge that some of you will be familiar with, which is made entirely by infusing tallow. And I don't want to give the secrets of that away because that's a product really near and dear to my heart that I have had people try to replicate in the past, and it was just a bummer because that recipe took me and Francesco a long time of very passionately experimenting with some of our favorite scents. But what I can tell you is that it was made using the enfleurage process, and that I can talk about. In fact, we have talked about it here before, and it's pretty easy to, poke around online and learn about enfleurage. It is an old world French style of perfumery where you're capturing the fresh smell of plants. For example, if anyone at home has infused herbs into oils using heat, if you're using something fresh like a flower, you're going to get the scent of that, flower with heat, right? Like a wilty kind of smell. So, just walked up on my most recent chip drop, and it's a lot smaller than I was expecting, but it'll do. Sorry, I knew I was going to get distracted by that one. Oh, where you are placing the flowers on the wax fresh every single day, meaning you're changing them out every day for new fresh flowers to capture that fresh scent. So that is an idea, but the most common method that people will use if you want to infuse just tallow is a crock pot or a double broiler, and you are only able to infuse the tallow while it's completely melted and liquefied. So the best way to do that is slow and low and for as long as possible. So typically if we're heating tallow in a double broiler and infusing it with plants, we'll heat our water up, get the double broiler nice and hot on high, and once it is fully heated up, we will turn that back down to low and let it sit there all day. You'll notice it change colors with whatever plant matter you're using, and then you'll strain that out, and that's your infused tallow. Unfortunately, you cannot infuse tallow the way you would oils, where you chop or blend your herbs up and let it sit in the oil for 4 to 6 weeks, because tallow, like shea butter and coconut oil, are firm when they're cooled. So there's just not going to be any infusing going on, because it's all about, with tincturing and oil infusions, the surface area of the herb that's covered by your menstruum, alcohol, oil, what have you. And if your menstruum is solid, well, then there's not really any surface area getting, soaked and infused by those plant leaves. So that's my best advice for you, if you're making something like a tallow butter or a tallow salve, since tallow is really hard and firm when it's cool, you're actually going to use a pretty high percentage of oils to get it to be, you know, dippable with your finger and not just totally hard like using a lot of beeswax would give you. And this is why sometimes people will even use tallow in place of beeswax in salves. Beeswax is often there to firm things up, and tallow is going to do that too. So you can totally make a salve using tallow instead of beeswax. Let me think of what the other questions were. I know one of the questions that I got was, what is the difference in a tonic herb and an herb that you're going to use more sparingly? A tonic herb is an herb that you can take every day. For example, a nutritive herb, something that you can take a lot of and as often as you'd like to. An example of something that you would use sparingly is like black cohosh, yellow root. I don't use a lot of herbs that have to be used sparingly. Lobelia. And herbs that you're using sparingly, this either has to do with dose, like if you're taking an herb like lobelia, you can take lobelia for longer periods of time. You just can't take a lot of it, because when taken at super high doses, it can induce vomiting and just nausea in general. Whereas then there's some other herbs like black cohosh that are just really insanely strong, potent herbs, where if you take those for long periods of time, they can throw your hormones off. Your body can become somewhat dependent on it. I think when people hear dependency, they think addiction, but that's not always the case. Sometimes your body's just like, okay, this is how we operate now. And then when you take that thing away, they're like, what are we doing? Where did it go? So herbs that have a really strong action are typically the ones that you're going to use sparingly. Black cohosh is a great example, and blue cohosh, because these are actually things that can be used during certain times in your pregnancy and can't be used in certain times of your pregnancy, because at certain times of your pregnancy and at certain doses, this can be, what's the proper word here? Imagog? Oh, I can't remember. This can prevent a viable pregnancy, whereas it can also help with childbirth in different parts of your term. So that's the interesting thing about herbs. But you know, when you're just listening to someone talk about all these things like I'm doing right now, it sounds so intimidating. But if you are committed to learning herbalism and you're learning about herbs, when you come to understand an herb that you're working with, these things come pretty intuitively. For example, if we know that black cohosh can help induce labor, well, of course that's not something that you're going to want to take in an early pregnancy, right? Because you don't want to do that then. And certain actions of like, what's another good one? I mean, I'll even use lobelia as an example here. If you took a high dose of lobelia one time and it made you nauseous, you probably wouldn't take that high of a dose anymore. So I know these things can seem intimidating, but when you're actually working with and learning these herbs, it really becomes second nature. This is something I use poke as an example for all the time too, which is definitely another example of an herb that demands a certain level of respect when working with it. You can definitely overdo it quite easily with poke, and it's not good to eat more than a couple of the berries or take more than a couple drops of the tincture. This to me is something that would be wildly intuitive in nature, because if you've ever eaten a pokeberry, it is disgusting. It's very foul. It like takes all the moisture out of your mouth. It tastes horrible. The seed is really hard, and so naturally you want to spit it out, and you don't want to do that again, you know? So to me, these are signs in nature that can be really clear when you're listening. So if you feel intimidated by certain aspects of herbalism, the best thing to do is to go, okay, this is fine. This just means I need to spend more time in this area. And what that would mean in this instance is that you just need to spend more time learning about the herbs that you want to work with. And that's really the easiest way to approach it. If you try to learn about every herb in existence, it's going to be quite difficult. But if you're learning about just the herbs that grow in your area or these specific herbs that you've been really wanting to work with lately, that makes it way more approachable. So think of it that way. Okay, I want to jump back into the tonic herbs conversation because I ended up kind of trailing off there. The best quote I've ever heard when describing a tonic herb, so sorry for the geese, they are so freaking loud, is that, let me try to remember it in its completion. Tonic herbs support natural systems of the body rather than forcing it to change. And that goes hand in hand with what I was saying about really strong herbal actions, like in things like yellow root and black cohosh and lobelia is they're really freaking good at what they do, right? And so they are forcing a slight change in the body, the same way that some people will. Oh, here's another good example of a really strong herb that you have to use with caution. Oh, come on, brain. I don't know why every time I need to like mention this herb, I lose the name for a second. Okay, the herb I was trying to think of is called boneset. Boneset is incredible at what it does, and it's one of those emergency herbs that I feel like any family should have on hand for the reason that I'm about to get into, which is going to go good in this tonic herb conversation. Let me be clear, boneset is not a tonic herb. Boneset is really great at reducing fevers, and most of the time we want to support a fever, right? Because it's the body's natural response, and having a fever helping to warm a cool body is a good thing. Well, boneset reduces fevers by inducing sweating, which cools the body down and helps you rid some toxins. So it's helpful, but it is forcing the body to break a fever, essentially. And this is great when fevers are getting a little too high and you're a little worried that they might be causing more damage in you or your child than they're doing good. And so boneset is a great example of something that's going to interrupt the body's natural processes and do what it does best. It really does help with so many other things. Boneset is a super versatile herb, but it's one of those like poke where I will reach for my boneset tincture or the herb and put it in a little bit of tea when one of us is so ill that we are desperate for relief and things are getting a little fucking scary. Whereas tonic herbs, like think holy basil, ashwagandha, raspberry leaf, nettle, milky oats, basically anything that's in our Mountain Mama blend. A lot of times tonic herbs are going to be adaptogens, they're going to be nutritive, tropho-restorative herbs, things that are really mineral rich, things that are supporting what's already happening in the systems of the body. They're nourishing your organs. They're working really hard and they're doing really amazing things, but they're not like knocking any one thing out of the park. And that said, they are usually very multifunctional herbs, meaning that they're doing more than one thing for the body, which is another reason why we like to take them regularly. So that's a good way to identify tonic versus non-tonic herbs. Again, when you really get to know an herb, you will likely be able to point out whether it's tonic or not. So try not to worry too much about knowing exactly what tonic herbs are and aren't. Okay, another question that I got was herbal medicine for pets, and this is something that I get a lot, and I'm really excited to have this conversation after something quite strange that happened to me recently. So we got coccidia in our flock for the first time, and the mistake that I made was I adopted a flock of chickens from a neighbor that was having surgery, and I did not quarantine them long enough. I usually quarantine birds for a couple days, which is long enough for me to keep an eye on them, see if they seem visibly sick or if there's anything potentially wrong with them. And then I throw them into the flock. And now with a mature flock of birds, which most of ours are, this would have been okay. But because we had 4 young sea brights, I think they were a couple months old, and they were in our run with the rest of the birds. These darn geese. I'll try to show you what I'm talking about here. So here's our main coop. That's where they were. This is our little brooder for brand new babies. That's our transition brooder, where our flock can like start to see them and smell them and get familiar with their noises. So that's where the sea brights were. Well, they were still young and their immune systems were still being built. So when we introduced that new strain of coccidia through these adopted birds, things did not go well for them, and unfortunately we lost 3 of them. 2 of them we lost overnight, and I was very confused because I've never seen coccidia before, but I was able to see it in the 2 birds that were left. They were really fluffed up. They had pale combs, visibly sick, and also key signs of coccidia specifically. Let me try to shorten this story a bit. So, long story short, I treated my flock for coccidia with a recommended dose instruction that I found online. Well, what I did not know, and I actually found many articles online that said the opposite of this, which is where I messed up, is that the treatment for coccidia is a thiamine inhibitor. And basically how coccidia lives is by binding to proteins and vitamins in the body. And so us thinking and reading online that the Cedar treatment was a thiamine inhibitor and causes your birds to become vitamin deficient, we thought, okay, well, let's give them lots of vitamins while we're giving them this treatment. In doing so, this caused sort of an internal war between the treatment that was trying to do its job and the vitamins and proteins that were helping the coccidia to thrive, and we ended up accidentally killing one of our birds this way. Well, after finding a vet, unfortunately on an online forum of vets, I was ripped to shreds by these veterinarians because they essentially were calling me an idiot for not having a bird vet. Sadly, we don't have one within 50 miles of where we live right now. And, just saying, oh yeah, listen to forums, that's a great way to lose your entire flock, blah, 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 blah. Well, after talking to these vets for a long time, I realized they were operating from a much different place than I was. They were operating more from, chicken factories, chicken meat mills, if you will. So they asked me, this is like when I started to piece this together with a friend, they said, do you ever go to other places that have chickens? Do you have any friends with farms, etc.? And I said, yeah, of course, most of my friends have farms, / we get our vegetables and our meat from farms. Like most people in places that we go to have chickens or farms. And then her next question was, well, are your birds vaccinated? And I said, no. And she said, well, there's your problem. Every single time you step onto someone's property, if you're not putting little shoe coverings around your shoes to enter their farm, you're bringing strains of, stuff from their farm back to yours and contaminating and killing your flock. And at first I got really scared by this and I started freaking out, researching vaccinating my chickens and having antibiotics on hand. And then a friend nicely reminded me that that's the opposite of why I raise chickens. I'm specifically wanting to raise, wild non-vaccinated, no antibiotic, organic chickens with natural immunity. And the reason that my chickens survived the coccidia in the first place was because they have a very strong natural immunity. The only reason that we lost one was due to, counteracting the treatment that we were giving them. And I could go on and on about all the crazy things that this woman said, like the fact that using chicken wire causes chickens to have a metal contamination. And like I get the theory, but obviously we're going to use chicken wire. Obviously we're going to go to friends' houses with farms. And these are not things that I can be afraid of. This is similar to having a baby and going out into the world with your baby for the first time. It's scary, but you have to trust that your body and your body's ability to feed this child what it needs is doing its job. And it's scary, but all of that long story to say, I think that just like with humans, modern medicine absolutely is important and plays a role, but I don't think that it has to be the main role in every aspect of you and your pet's life. For example, there are many things that you can treat or prevent at home with cats and dogs even. And that was, I think this person's specific question was about cats. And we've gotten lots of similar questions in the past about dogs. One good example is, I'm sure you all see this with your animals too, when our dogs begin scooting their butts across the floor, we know that they're likely uncomfortable in their GI tract. They're likely constipated. They're probably, itchy down there and uncomfortable. And so the first thing that we'll do is start adding pumpkin, canned organic raw pumpkin to their food. This is also when we might bring out extra probiotics or maybe splash some kraut juice in their food. Another thing is if they are vomiting, like when your dogs go out and eat a bunch of grass and help themselves puke, what you can do to try to help settle their tummies is make a really small bit of rice and broth. You can add chicken, or you can just add some chicken stock, any kind of broth. And this, in my experience, works really fast if there's not anything underlying. And so anytime we make bone broth, we'll typically save the veggies and the onions and all that stuff that was in there and dehydrate it and sort of give it to the dogs like crackers. We actually go over this in our bone broth video, and we will pour the bone broth on the dog's food. Now, here's something important. I did not realize until recently that some people don't strain the fat off of their bone broth. If you're not doing that, you can definitely overdo the amount of fat that you give a dog. Their livers can only take so much fat, just like ours. So we specifically remove the fat cap from our broth and use that as cooking tallow. So when we give our dogs or animals broth, we don't really have to worry about overdoing the fat content. The same exact thing goes for kitty cats. There's a lot of stuff that we prevent with Tito through things like the pumpkin, probiotics, a little bit of broth here and there, a little bit of like the juice that comes from tuna. When we make fish, we'll kind of give him the little extra bits of fish. And that's really, really helpful for cats, specifically omega fatty acids and broths. That level of collagen is great for them as well, especially if you have a dog with joint issues like we do. The thinking that you're starting to have for yourself, most likely, can absolutely be applied to the animals. So if you have a dog with joint issues, you might have been considering CBD, turmeric, black pepper supplements for that. You can absolutely give that to your dogs. And actually, the pet CBD that we make has turmeric and black pepper for this reason. What's another great example? I do think that this person mentioned their cat having a cold. I can't really remember, but there's a supplement that's really, really popular for chickens. I think it's called Vet RX, which is funny because our pet salve is Pet RX. And it's actually just essential oils, like eucalyptus, rosemary, lavender, thyme. And you put a couple drops in their food or water, and it helps with respiratory things. And you can give this to all animals. Um, my only concern with people making this at home is you really want to make sure that you have pure food grade essential oils. This is one of the very rare times that I'm like, yeah, use essential oils internally. But even their dosage instructions, it's like 1 drop for a gallon of water for our chickens. And if you didn't want to go that route, things that you could do that we also do is we will use those herbs fresh from the garden. Actually, today even, I used mountain mint, monarda, lavender, catmint, yarrow, and sage and oregano. And I like chopped it up and I sprinkled some in the chicken's bedding area. Well, this would, if you were doing this for your cat, you could either try to mix that in their food. They might not love the taste of raw herbs, so another thing that you could do, similar to what I was saying for your dog, you could cook that with a teeny tiny bit of rice and broth, to help them get that inside of them, basically, without essential oils. But I honestly think even just them inhaling it is really helpful for them, the same way that we would do an herbal steam or maybe add herbs to a humidifier. These are things you can do for pets. It feels really bougie, but you could do it. Another thing that we have done in the past that I've talked about on here before with other QAs is giving our animals tinctures and teas. Also something that you can definitely do. The best way to do this is through their water. You can add, a couple drops of tincture to a little glass of water to make sure that they're getting it. Or you could make a small amount of tea or infusion and dilute that with water for their drinking water. And if it's the only source of water that you're giving them, they will drink it. So these are just some general ideas. I know I've recommended this a bunch before because I still occasionally get questions from people like, what was that homesteading book you recommended? We usually have it on our coffee table, but I'm not seeing it right now. Oh, crap. Let me see if I can find it. It's something like Country Wisdom and Know-How. Man, that's a great book. I wonder where the heck it is. It's one of those books that you don't read all the way through, but you have it on hand and you can just kind of flip through to the chapter that you need when you need it. It's got all kinds of stuff like how to build a chicken coop, how to butcher animals, how to grow vegetables, and there is a chapter in there on natural medicine for pets. And that was kind of my first inspiration years ago, reading that, where they're basically talking about it the same way I am, where you're thinking with your body in mind, and then you're just changing the dosing for animals. And they have a great chart in that book that's something like your dosage for a cat is going to be like 1/6 what you would give yourself. Your dosage for a dog is going to be like 1/4. Things like that. You can find these online relatively easily. So I think without any direct pet issue questions, I'll go ahead and stop there with some general preventative stuff. Let's go see if we have more questions. Oh, actually, I just thought of one. I know that someone was struggling with heartburn and indigestion. This was a huge thing that I went through for a very long time. And what I discovered was there's very few natural things that are going to help with heartburn and indigestion instantly. This is for sure one of those things that requires a dietary change. And it's something that might just pop up if you are ingesting certain foods that can induce it regularly, right? Like maybe you're good at avoiding those things most of the time, but you go stay with a friend or a parent where those are the prominent foods. So if you're in that situation, I'm very not the type of person to plug my products, but our stomach mend tincture is absolutely insane as far as how quickly and efficiently it works. So this is something that a lot of people keep in their bags on hand for stuff like this. A bitters is a preventative. If you take a bitters while you're having heartburn and indigestion, it'll help a little bit, but this is more something that you would take before or after a meal to try to prevent having heartburn and indigestion. And really incorporating foods, bitter foods and herbs are just a really good way to prevent that in general. Our bitters blend, I thought I had a stomach mend in here too, but I don't see it right at this very moment. Our bitters and I have a video called How to Make Your Own Bitters. You can search for it on YouTube or Patreon. This has shiso, anise hyssop, licorice, peppermint, catnip, lemon balm, chamomile, angelica root, skullcap, fennel, ginger, and tangerine. Really tasty blend, really good. And then, of course, just incorporating bitter foods into the diet. A lot of times, though, it's going to be similar things. Like, we can incorporate ginger, fennel, lemon, things like that into our diet. Roots are often really good at that. Like, every time that we make broth, and I know I've talked a lot about this as well, we always add things that are really rich in prebiotics and are slightly bitter, like burdock, yellow dock, chicory, dandelion. There's a few other things. Basically, if you're a tier 3 patron, you got this in the mail recently as a gift. Tossin broth. It's really similar to our sipping broth, except it's got a few added things like poria mushroom. I'm just going to list the things that are different about it. Turmeric, burdock, yellow dock, alfalfa, garlic, onion, oregano, and a bunch of mushrooms. And then also things that help a lot for me, ghee helps me so much with digestion. I love ghee. I love cooking with it. I love adding it to drinks. We don't do it all the time, but if I'm dealing with any sort of heartburn, indigestion, gut, anything, herbal infusions, broths, ghee, those are some of my first immediate go-tos, as well as, some supplements and things like that. So I hope that helps. I know it's not like a quick, fast answer, but like I said, stomach mend is a quick, fast answer if this is just something that happens every now and then where, like changing your whole diet forever isn't necessarily applicable. All right, I'm going to go see if there's more questions. All right, folks, that was the end of the live Q&A. I did not find any more questions. That said, I would love to start getting more questions. We used to get too many questions to where we would have to sort of sort through them and make sure that we hadn't answered them before. So please, if you have any questions at all about your herbalism journey, you're welcome to message them or leave them on Discord for the next live Q&A. Thanks so much.